Welcome to Tigers in 20, a GoTigers247 audio podcast, your one-stop shop for all things University of Memphis Tigers athletics. Here are your hosts, founder of GoTigers247, Brooks Hansen, and lead writer for GoTigers247, Christian Fowler.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode. I'm your host, Christian Fowler, and joining me is GoTigers247's digital content producer, Kenny Stubblefield. And we're basically recording an emergency podcast right now. Obviously, I typically record with Brooks. He's currently at work, but with all the news that's been dropping, me and Kenny decided to go ahead and jump on here. We know there's no concrete news right now of what's going to happen after all this, but obviously I'm sure everyone that's listening to this has heard that the American Conference Tournament has been canceled, along with, I think there's, Kenny, 6 or 7 other conference tournaments that have now been canceled.
Yeah, I think pretty much every one of them have been canceled at this point.
Yeah, pretty much every conference tournament scheduled at this point is canceled at this point. The NBA has suspended the season. NHL is done. I think MLB is suspending their spring activities. So there's basically a massive laundry list of things that are suspended, canceled, delayed, whatever you want to call it. Pretty much everything is out of whack right now. So Kenny, me and you were actually talking about this last night when they announced the suspension of the NBA season. We were kind of like, well, next is the NCAA tournament and the conference tournament. So what was, I guess, like I said, since we don't have any concrete news to go off of, what were your initial thoughts when the news came out that the conference tournaments were being canceled?
I think first and foremost, the things that need to be said just off the jump is that I think these are all good moves. The coronavirus is a very scary thing, and it clearly is showing it's showing no plans of stopping soon in terms of the spread of it. And so I think it's important that we keep into perspective that the things that are being impacted right now are sporting events, and while this is a sports podcast, it's there's a lot more important things out there, and that's health and safety of the people that we love and just the country as a whole. So I think it's a good move. I'll be honest with you, when I woke up this morning and took my kids to school and came home and was very excited about watching games today. I was extremely excited to watch these conference tournaments. And so when I found out that every one of them had been canceled, that was pretty sad, to be honest with you. It kind of ruined my day.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you made a perfect point. Of course, anyone that's listening to this podcast more than likely loves sports. Obviously, we are massive sports junkies. So, I mean, it definitely sucks to see the NBA season suspended and to see all these other sports. I'm not an NHL fan or an MLB fan, but there's a ton of those out there, and those sports have kind of suspended things for the time being. So it really is incredibly crazy to see everything kind of get shut down within 12 to 15 hours, and went from the NBA to the conference tournaments to the NHL, and the MLB announcing spring activities were canceled. So it's crazy. I think it's unlike anything I've definitely ever seen. When I first saw the conference tournament news, though, I wasn't surprised. The only thing that surprised me thus far was the NBA. When they shut it down because of the things that happened prior to the Utah OKC game with Rudy Gobert, I was like, oh God, okay, it's starting to get real. And now, obviously, here we are, less than 24 hours later with basically no sports left. So it is incredibly weird to see everything get shut down. Kind of within the same frame of time, but we're kind of gonna have to build off of there's no concrete news. Like, we can't sit here and say, okay, so since the conference tournaments are canceled, the NCAA is gonna take the top 3 seeds from every conference, and that's gonna be the tournament, because we don't know. I mean, hell, in my opinion, the NCAA tournament is also gonna be canceled. I mean, you can't have the NCAA tournament without every conference tournament, because the NCAA tournament's about Cinderella stories, feel-good stories, teams that you never thought were going to make it, get into the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight. And without the conference tournament, I mean, you really limit those things. You limit the excitement because there's teams that aren't supposed to get in that get in because of conference tournaments, or there's teams that have started slacking off at the end of the regular season that build momentum and win conference tournaments that may have went to the NCAA tournament anyway, and then they go run through the tournament bracket because of the momentum they built in the conference tournament. So they haven't announced it as of our recording of this podcast, but I would expect it to come relatively soon. I know March Madness is obviously the biggest college basketball event of the year. It's a money making machine for the NCAA, but like you said, Kenny, at this point, it's not about sports. Do we all love sports? Yes, but at the end of the day, the most important thing right now is the health and safety of all the fans and the coaches and the coaching staffs and the players, student athletes that are involved in these massive crowds, and that's really what all this boils down to.
Well, what's interesting in the time that we've been recording, in the few minutes that we've been recording, Kansas and Duke have now come out and made statements about their participation in the NCAA men's tournament. Duke, I think, was first. Duke came out and said that they're putting a suspension on, they're canceling all athletic travel indefinitely. And then Kansas, a few minutes later, did the same thing. So at this moment, it's like what you said. At this moment, the only things in men's basketball that have been canceled has been the conference tournaments. The NCAA has not made a determination on the men's tournament coming up, but Duke and Kansas have made their decision. And so it's going to be very, very difficult to see a men's basketball tournament, March Madness, happen without Kansas and Duke, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way in hell they play a conference tournament. I mean, they play an NCAA tournament without two of the biggest fan bases in college basketball. And I saw the Duke one before we started recording. I didn't see Kansas until you said something about it, but that's literally two of the college basketball blue bloods. It's two of the biggest fan bases, two of the best teams in the country. There's no way you can have an NCAA tournament without that. And Kansas is the number one ranked team in the country right now. So you're going to have a conference tournament without the best team in the country according to the rankings? No way. I don't see there's any way that happens now.
What do you think? I mean, don't you think it would be rather hypocritical of the NCAA to actually go ahead with a men's basketball tournament if with all these conference tournaments being canceled? I mean, don't you think that's pretty hypocritical?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you can't have the big show without everything that goes with it. And also, if all these conferences throughout college basketball are canceling conference tournaments, then the NCAA tournament has to be canceled as well. And like I said, money is what drives the world round. Obviously, I mean, everyone knows that, but it's not about that at this point. The NCAA is going to have to, like I said, it should happen soon. It should happen relatively soon where they go ahead and announce, because you've already had two of your best teams pull out. You've had every conference tournament canceled. You might as well go ahead and bite the bullet, cancel it, get it over with. But Kenny, something else that's actually really interesting about this, and this is, one of the things where we can kind of steer the narrative a little bit, because we can pretty much guarantee that some of these things are going to happen, is that coming up is one of the most important recruiting times for basketball and football. You have the spring evaluation period for college basketball, where a lot of under the radar guys are found. There's still visits being conducted at this time. You're still trying to get some of those top prospects who haven't committed, especially in a case like Memphis where there's multiple top guys that you're still after that are uncommitted. And then also on the football side of things, and I don't want to get too far on football yet because I want to touch on that in a minute. But football's also in a recruiting period right now where they're about to go into spring football, where they have recruits and everything like that on campus. So that's another very interesting factor, is that it's not just college basketball tournaments right now, but this is also gonna affect recruiting around a time when a lot of guys really start to make decisions, which makes things even more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as aware of the recruiting schedule as you and Brooks are. You and Brooks know everything about it. And so in terms of, everybody kind of concentrates, all fans concentrate on the tournaments that are going on, conference and NCAA men's tournament during this time of the season, but recruiting doesn't stop. There's always recruiting going on. So right now, with everything in the place that we are right now, if it was a normal year and that there was conference tournaments going on right now and then NCAA men's tournament coming up pretty soon, what kind of recruiting stuff would be happening right now if it was a normal year?
So at this time, Kenny, when you look at the recruiting calendars and everything, you can see that men's basketball is still in a recruiting period. So that makes things even more complicated. The recruiting period goes until April 1st. Then it's a quiet period. And then you have a week to a week and a half of a dead period. So, and then the next you have the evaluation period in mid-April. So if this thing stretches that far, it could affect the spring evaluation period, which, as I said, is the 17th through the 19th in April, and then the 24th through the 26th of April. So that's looking a little bit down the line, but right now is an open period where recruits can take visits, off-campus contacts can be made and stuff like that. But if coaches want to get guys on campus at this point, you really can't. I mean, if they're canceling all these things, you can't imagine that they would let a recruit come on campus. There's just no way that anything like that happens. So, like I said, you kind of have to look at this and take it for what it's worth, because we can't say, oh, this is going to affect so-and-so recruit. This is going to affect X and Y recruit, because Memphis's guys have already taken their official visits. Most of Memphis's guys that they're highly recruiting for 2020 have already taken official visits. But even when you look at a guy like Harrison Ingram, a 2021 five-star who was on campus last Thursday for the Wichita State game, if this would have happened then, all that wouldn't have happened. That never would have went down. So if they had any upcoming visits scheduled for guys to come on campus on unofficial visits or official visits, likely that stuff won't be happening right now. And like I said, I can't say for certain if they have anything coming up or not, but if they did, then it's likely shut down. So it's just an interesting point to me to think about, because as of right now, everyone's kind of focused on the front end, which obviously makes sense. I mean, there's a ton to dig into there. But when you look at the long-term effects, especially with recruiting, it could get interesting and it could shake things up, because if one school is pushing really hard and about to get a visit that could change the outlook of a recruit's recruitment, and that doesn't happen, then who knows? It's a what could have been. So it's just interesting to think about. It's nothing that we have, any specifics on, like this player was supposed to come on a visit, now he's not going to be able to. We don't have any information like that, and I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's interesting to think about what it could affect down the road.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, because, I mean, I think we all want to have answers, right? Like, we all want to know how this global pandemic of the coronavirus is affecting, the sports teams that we love. But we don't have answers, man. This is the first time. I mean, we've never experienced anything like this before in our lives, and so I think it's a brand new situation for everybody involved. I mean, you think about last year in particular. Christian and I got to go to the McDonald's All-American game and to the Jordan Brand Classic. McDonald's was in Atlanta and Jordan Brand was in Las Vegas. And we got to see some of the best high school players in the country, and quite a majority of them were had already committed to the school that they were going to be going to, but some of the main players hadn't. Specifically, how it impacted Memphis was Precious Achiuwa was there, Boogie Ellis was at Jordan Brand, and who else was there that hadn't? I think Cole Anthony was there that he hadn't committed yet. Jaden McDaniel was there.
Trenton Watford hadn't committed yet.
Trenton Watford hadn't committed yet.
Yeah, there was a lot of top uncommitted prospects. I mean, it was probably 60-40. I mean, a lot of those top, anywhere from 15 to 30 guys were committed, but a lot of the top guys were not committed at that point last year.
And so this year, McDonald's is at the beginning of April in Chicago, I think, this year, and Jordan Brand is at the end of March, and that is where is that at, Christian?
I am not sure on that.
I don't know either.
On the spot there,
but
let's see.
These two events would be happening, are massive events for some of these young players to be seen again, to have coaches come out and still and continue to recruit and things like that. And no decision has been made on those two events, but I don't see how those things happen at this point. And so it's like you said, man, it impacts, obviously right now, it impacts our favorite universities' games because their conference tournaments have been canceled. I'm sure the NCAA men's tournament will be canceled at some point soon. But it also impacts going into next year with recruiting, and that is so interesting, man. That is so crazy how all this is just kind of the ramifications of this thing that's out of our control at this point, you know?
Yeah, so Jordan Brand is March 27th, like you said, at the end of March, but it's actually in Chicago. And then McDonald's is at the beginning of April, and it is in Houston. So that's the two All-Star games. And March 27th doesn't look too likely to have the Jordan Brand. So like you mentioned, we could see, the two biggest All-Star games in the country for high school recruits. We could see both of those canceled because you can't really postpone those events because guys are signing and enrolling in May and June. Like you can't really push it back that much further. It's interesting to think about all the ramifications of it. And I think one more before we kind of wrap this up is to think about spring football. I don't think there's been maybe a few universities have canceled spring football, and it's the universities that have canceled all spring activities. But Memphis is yet to say anything about spring football. Practice is actually supposed to start next Tuesday, so March 17th on St. Patrick's Day. I don't see any way that they don't cancel that. I mean, if they're canceling all these major events, I don't really see them having spring football. I know there aren't fans necessarily there during spring football practices, but media, players, coaches, like that's what all this safety boils down to. Yes, fans are a massive part of it, but it's also players and coaches, especially when you look at what's happening with the Utah Jazz. I mean, Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, two all-star players, have already tested positive for the virus. And so when you look at that, it's very interesting to think about what they will do with spring football. It's very likely that it could be canceled, and then you kind of look at, well, do they postpone it? Do they back it up and try to do something, because the spring game's not until April 17th. So do they shorten spring practice and have a spring game, or do they cancel all spring activities and just start in the summer with summer camp and have their summer practices, and there's no spring football this year? So it's crazy to think about how far this really could go, because we're just on the basketball side of it right now. We really haven't even started looking at what it could mean for football, because the spring football is right around the corner. I know it's breaking news. It's already started.
I have breaking news. The football scoop staff just reported the SEC is suspending spring practices and recruiting through the end of March.
Yep. That's the first domino.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy.
It's the first domino. I mean, this is literally happening as we're doing this. That was like 15 minutes ago, I think, when they posted that. So that's the first domino. Like I said, it's probably coming soon. I just can't see any way of Memphis having football practice literally next week. And I don't think they can practice next week anyway, because they already put Memphis on an extended spring break through next week, so it'd be 2 weeks. Even if all this happens, I know there's a ton of scenarios here, but even if it was to happen in 2 weeks, or even if they were to start next week, I just don't see it happening. It just doesn't make sense. Yes, spring football is fun for a lot of people. I personally love spring football, always have. But it's not something to risk health over. Like if the NCAA tournament and the NBA season aren't worth risking health over, then neither is spring football. And that's, we talked about the recruiting side of it with basketball. But with football, that's a huge recruiting time. They get a ton of players on campus for spring practices. They bring a ton of top targets in for the spring game. So there's just so much recruiting that goes around in this time. And hell, Kenny, I wouldn't be shocked by the time if we put this podcast out that it is canceled. They do go ahead and announce it. So I mean, we can basically already speak about it like it's happened, because I would say that it's going to happen relatively soon, just like everything else getting canceled. So, Kenny, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, it really is a laundry list of things that you kind of have to unpack here. So I know this episode is a little bit all over the place, which, I mean, you kind of have to expect with everything that's going on. So really the goal of this was to kind of just recap everything first of all, because there's been so much happen within the past 14 to 15 hours. But also, I think it's very important to look at what's next. I understand thinking about what's happening now, everything that's going on now, but for us here, what we always try to do is broaden perspective and look at what's next and give insights on what could come and what ramifications of certain things could be. So that's really where we're at right now. Kenny and I obviously spoke before this podcast because there's no way in hell we could have done this without talking a little bit, and we both were kind of in agreement on everything that it could impact. As we've mentioned throughout the episode, I think recruiting is the biggest thing outside of everything that's currently going on. So just take it for what it is. I guess that's really all you can say right now. I mean, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. There's no more basketball as of right now unless the NCAA tournament stays on, and there likely won't be much spring football. So sports are on the downside right now, and like I said, I know that sucks, but I think we all just kind of have to collectively understand that it's for the better. It's really the best thing that they could have done. Like Kenny said when we first started the show, there are a lot of things going on right now, and I think for all of these commissioners of each conference to come together and do this is very smart. Along with guys like Adam Silver in the NBA canceling or suspending their season, so I think it's the smartest move. I think it's what they had to do. It sucks for fans, absolutely, but I mean, at this point, it's more than sports. This is way more than sports. This is worrying about really the health and well-being of the fans, players, coaches, and really just the people of the United States. So that's really all I have. I know that was kind of on a soapbox there for a second, but Kenny, you got anything else?
Yeah, man. I'm just saying. I would just say to everybody out there, just stay safe. Do what you can do to keep your family healthy. Wash your hands. Just I know that sounds so simple, but just wash your hands. Limit where you go outside of your own home, and just keep your family healthy. If you start, I think there's a lot of things online right now for kind of figuring out symptoms and what you might have. Just pay attention to how you're feeling. Pay attention to the symptoms that you're showing, and go get some treatment if you need it. But sports will be here. Sports isn't going anywhere. What's most important is your family and keeping yourself healthy. So that's all I got, though.
So with that being said, that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Tigers in 20. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love for you to leave a comment and a rating wherever you download your podcasts. If you are interested in daily content all about the University of Memphis athletic program, please hop over to www.GoTigers247.com. Articles are uploaded daily, and you can join the GoTigers247 family by signing up for the VIP membership for even more behind-the-scenes information.